Crystal's sangria splashed across my cream silk dress like a crimson accusation, and her words hit even harder. "Now you look as cheap as you are." I just smiled, walked over to the bride, and whispered something in her ear that made her face go white as her wedding gown. 5 minutes later, Crystal was the one everyone was staring at. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me tell you how we got to this delicious moment of justice. Because, honey, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. I'm Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. And at 64, I thought I'd seen every kind of family drama imaginable. I was wrong. The morning of Tyler's wedding started innocently enough. My grandson, my precious boy whose father had died 3 years ago in that awful car accident, was finally marrying his college sweetheart Sophia. I'd watched their relationship bloom from awkward teenage dating to this beautiful moment. And despite everything that had happened with my daughter-in-law Crystal since my son David passed, I was determined to make this day perfect for Tyler. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, that cream silk dress with the delicate pearl necklace David had given me for my 60th birthday. Looking back, I should have worn armor instead. Crystal had been giving me that look all morning, the one that said I was somehow ruining her vision of the perfect wedding by simply existing. You know the type. Every gesture calculated, every smile practiced, every word dripping with just enough sweetness to hide the poison underneath. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Tyler looked so handsome in his navy suit, and Sophia was radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace gown. Watching them exchange vows, I felt my heart swell with pride and grief in equal measure. David should have been here to walk his son down the aisle, to give that father of the groom speech, to see his boy become a man. Instead, it was just me in the front row, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue while Crystal held court in the opposite corner, surrounded by her book club friends. During the cocktail hour, I noticed something odd. Crystal kept pulling people aside for hushed conversations, her face animated with what looked like concern. Each conversation ended with the person glancing toward Sophia with expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval. It reminded me of wildfire, how quickly whispers can spread and consume everything in their path. But I was having too good a time catching up with old friends and watching Tyler beam with happiness to pay much attention to Crystal's dramatics. After all, this was her usual behavior at family gatherings, always the center of attention, always managing some crisis or another. What could she possibly be stirring up at her own son's wedding? The reception was held in the garden pavilion of the Riverside Country Club, all twinkling lights and white flowers that Sophia had arranged herself to save money. Sweet girl, always thinking practically, which I admired even if Crystal clearly didn't. I'd offered to help with wedding expenses, but Tyler had politely declined, saying he and Sophia wanted to start their marriage debt-free. Smart kids. I was chatting with Sophia's parents, lovely people who owned a small accounting firm downtown, when Crystal appeared at my elbow like a bad rash. "Oh, Margaret," she said in that saccharine voice that always set my teeth on edge. "Have you met Tyler's college friends? They've been asking about the family." Something in her tone made my grandmother instincts prickle, but I smiled and followed her to a group of young people clustered near the bar. "Everyone, this is Tyler's grandmother," Crystal announced with theatrical flourish, "the one who's been so generous with her opinions about the wedding planning." I felt my cheeks warm. Generous with opinions? I'd barely said 2 words about the wedding arrangements, having learned years ago that any input from David's side of the family was unwelcome in Crystal's world. But here she was, painting me as some kind of interfering mother-in-law figure in front of Tyler's friends. "Your grandson is lucky to have such an involved grandmother," one young man said politely, though I caught the subtle emphasis on involved that suggested he'd already heard some version of Crystal's narrative. "We all are," I replied carefully, shooting Crystal a look that she returned with innocent wide eyes. This was her specialty, making me look like the difficult one while playing the long-suffering daughter-in-law. It was a performance she'd perfected over the years, and I'd learned to navigate it with minimal damage. As we mingled, I started positioning myself near other conversations, pretending to admire the floral arrangements while actually listening to what Crystal was telling people. What I heard made my blood run cold. She was systematically spreading lies about Sophia's family, claiming Robert had legal troubles in his past and that Linda had struggled with substance issues. Complete fabrications delivered with just enough concern to seem believable. During the dinner service, I found myself seated at a table with distant relatives and family friends. Clearly, the overflow table, despite being the groom's only surviving grandmother. Crystal, meanwhile, held court at the head table, regaling everyone with animated stories that had them all laughing. From my strategic vantage point, I could see her gesturing frequently toward Sophia, her expression shifting between false concern and something that looked almost like satisfaction. That's when I understood what she was doing, and why. This wasn't just idle gossip. This was character assassination with a purpose. I excused myself and headed to the ladies' room, partly to collect my thoughts and partly to confirm what I suspected Crystal was up to. The bathroom was bustling with wedding guests touching up their makeup, and I overheard exactly what I feared. "Just terrible for Tyler," a woman was saying. Crystal was telling us about the girl's family background. Who would have thought she'd hide something like that from him? Another woman nodded sympathetically. Prison time for tax evasion, wasn't it? And the mother's drinking problem? Poor Tyler finding out on his wedding day. My hands clenched into fists. Prison? Drinking? I'd known Sophia's parents for 2 years now. Robert and Linda Chen were the most mild-mannered, respectable people you could imagine. He'd been an accountant his entire career, and she taught elementary school. The most scandalous thing about them was Linda's tendency to bring homemade cookies to every gathering. I waited until the ladies' room cleared, then pulled out my phone and made a call I'd been dreading but preparing for. "Patricia, it's Margaret Thompson. I need you to activate that investigation we discussed last month." "Yes, tonight." Crystal's making her move. Patricia Winters, the forensic accountant I'd hired 6 weeks ago, had been quietly building a case about Tyler's trust fund irregularities. As the original co-trustee when David died, I'd maintained oversight rights that Crystal had conveniently forgotten to mention. When I'd started noticing discrepancies in the quarterly reports, I'd decided to dig deeper. Returning to the reception, I watched Crystal with new eyes. Every conversation, every concerned expression, every sympathetic headshake was part of an elaborate performance designed to plant seeds of doubt about Sophia in the minds of everyone present. But I knew the real reason behind this character assassination. The trust fund. Tyler's inheritance from his father, worth nearly $600,000, would transfer to joint ownership with his spouse upon marriage. Crystal had been living quite comfortably off the management fees and some creative accounting that I was now documenting. She couldn't afford to lose control of that money to some nobody from a modest family. As the dinner courses were served, I noticed Crystal becoming more animated, more reckless with her storytelling. She was clearly building toward something bigger, some grand finale that would cement her narrative about Sophia being unworthy of the Patterson family name. That's when Tyler stood up to give his groom's speech, and Crystal saw her perfect opportunity. She rose from her seat at the head table, glass of sangria in hand, and began making her way across the pavilion toward me. Her face was flushed with wine and triumph, and I could see she was ready to make her final move. "Margaret!" she called out loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I just want to thank you for being so understanding about everything we've learned tonight." I stood up slowly, smoothing my cream silk dress, and smiled. "Of course, Crystal. What specifically are you referring to?" Crystal's smile was sharp as a blade as she approached my table, her sangria glass held like a weapon. Several nearby conversations had paused, sensing drama in the air. "Oh, you know," Crystal said with false sweetness, "about Sophia's family situation. I'm sure it must be difficult for you, learning about the criminal background and all." She gestured vaguely toward the head table where Sophia sat, looking confused by the sudden attention. "Criminal background?" I repeated loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear clearly. "That's a very serious accusation, Crystal. Are you saying you have documentation of criminal activity?" Crystal's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "Well, not documentation exactly, but Tyler deserves to know what kind of family he's marrying into. Some of us have been doing our research." "Research," I repeated thoughtfully. "How thorough of you. And what exactly did this research reveal?" Crystal straightened her shoulders, clearly deciding that offense was her best defense. "Robert Chen has a history of tax problems with the IRS, and Linda has struggled with alcohol addiction for years. The family has significant debt and financial instability. She paused for effect. I thought Tyler should know before it's too late. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler had stopped mid-sentence in his speech, staring at his stepmother with growing alarm. Sophia's face had gone pale, while her parents looked like they'd been slapped. That's fascinating, I said calmly, because the Robert Chen I know just completed pro bono tax preparation for 50 low-income families last year and has never had so much as a late filing. And Linda Chen has been the designated driver for her book club for 15 years because she doesn't drink alcohol at all. Crystal's face flushed red. You're defending them because you don't want to admit you were fooled too. People like that are very good at hiding their problems. People like what, Crystal? People who marry for money, she snapped, her composure finally cracking. Gold diggers who target wealthy families and then disappear with everything they can get their hands on. That's when she made her fatal mistake. In her anger and frustration, Crystal drew back her arm and threw her sangria directly at my cream silk dress. The red liquid splashed across the delicate fabric like blood, and her voice carried clearly across the silent pavilion. Now you look as cheap as you are defending these fortune hunters. The entire reception went dead silent. Even the catering staff froze in place. Crystal stood there breathing heavily, sangria dripping from her now empty glass, clearly realizing she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I looked down at my ruined dress, then back up at Crystal with a smile that made her take a step backward. Thank you, Crystal, I said quietly. You've just given me the perfect opening. Then I walked calmly to the head table where Sophia sat, looking mortified. I leaned down and whispered in Sophia's ear, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, but soft enough to seem intimate. Your new mother-in-law has been stealing from Tyler's trust fund for 3 years. I have the forensic accounting report in my purse, and the police are already investigating. Sophia's face went white as her wedding gown. She looked up at me with wide, shocked eyes, then glanced toward Tyler, who was still standing frozen with his speech notes in his hand. What did you just tell her? Crystal demanded, storming over to our table with her empty glass still clutched in her fist. I straightened up and faced the assembled wedding guests, my sangria-stained dress somehow giving me more authority rather than less. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but I believe there's been some confusion that needs to be addressed. Tyler finally found his voice. Grandma, what's going on? What's going on, sweetheart, is that your stepmother has been spreading malicious lies about your wife's family while systematically embezzling money from your trust fund. I reached into my evening purse and pulled out a folded document. This is a forensic accounting report showing that over the past 3 years, approximately $180,000 has been withdrawn from your trust fund for what Crystal labeled as management expenses. The collective gasp was audible across the pavilion. Tyler's face went from confusion to understanding to fury in the span of seconds. That's not true, Crystal shrieked. She's lying. She's a bitter old woman who can't stand that David chose me over his precious mother. Actually, I continued calmly, some of those management expenses included lease payments for Crystal's Mercedes, a kitchen renovation that cost $35,000, and 2 European vacations totaling $28,000. Tyler was staring at Crystal with dawning comprehension. You told me the trust was underperforming. You said I should be grateful it hadn't lost more money in the market downturn. I was protecting that money, Crystal protested desperately, from people exactly like her. She pointed dramatically at Sophia, gold diggers who marry for inheritance money. That's when Robert Chen, mild-mannered accountant extraordinaire, stood up from his table and did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated belly laugh that echoed across the silent pavilion. Ma'am, he said when he finally caught his breath, I hate to break it to you, but my daughter's trust fund is actually larger than your stepson's. We established it when she turned 18 with money from my family's accounting firm sale. The silence was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop. Then someone in the back started clapping slowly, and within seconds, half the reception was applauding Robert's perfect comeback. But I wasn't finished yet. 3 years of watching Crystal manipulate and control my family had led to this moment, and I was going to savor every second. "There's more," I announced, pulling out a second document that made Crystal actually stumble backward. "This is a copy of the original trust agreement that David set up for Tyler. The one that Crystal told him was too complicated to understand." Tyler reached for the document with shaking hands. "What does it say?" "It says," I replied, watching Crystal's face turn an interesting shade of gray, "that as the surviving co-trustee, I maintained oversight rights that Crystal conveniently forgot to mention. And when presented with evidence of financial misconduct, I had the authority to freeze the account and demand a full audit." Crystal's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You can't do that." "Actually, I already did. This afternoon, after Patricia Winters completed her forensic investigation." I smiled at the wedding guests, who were hanging on every word. "You see, when my son David died, he made me co-trustee specifically to prevent this kind of situation. He knew Crystal had expensive tastes." Tyler was reading through the trust documents, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to pure rage. "This says the trust was worth $580,000 when Dad died. You told me it was only worth $400,000 after market losses." "Market fluctuations," Crystal said weakly. "Investment fees, management costs that somehow paid for your lifestyle?" Sophia's voice was deadly quiet. "While you told Tyler he needed to be more financially responsible?" The crowd was completely captivated now, like watching a particularly dramatic soap opera unfold in real time. Several people had given up all pretense of politeness and were openly staring, wedding cake forgotten on their plates. Crystal straightened her shoulders, clearly deciding that offense was her best defense. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, I used some of that money, but I deserved it. Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed for this family? What I've given up to raise Tyler after his mother died?" "You mean after you moved in on a grieving widower and his traumatized toddler?" I asked pleasantly. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the fountain in the country club's main garden. Tyler's fork clattered to his plate. "What did you just say?" "Tyler," I said gently, realizing I'd just opened a door that couldn't be closed. "Your father was devastated when your mother Jennifer died in that car accident. Crystal was David's secretary at the law firm. She took advantage of his grief and your need for care." Crystal's face had gone from gray to purple. "That's not how it happened. David and I fell in love. We were meant to be together." "You were his employee who saw an opportunity," I corrected firmly. "And for 23 years, you've been positioning yourself as Tyler's devoted mother while systematically stealing from his inheritance." Tyler stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. 23 years of lies? That's when we heard the sound of footsteps approaching our table, and Detective Williams appeared in his dark suit. "Mrs. Patterson," he said calmly, "we'd like to have a word with you about some financial irregularities that have been reported." Detective Williams was professionally polite, but thoroughly efficient as he explained the situation to the stunned wedding reception. Apparently, my forensic accountant had been working with the police for 2 weeks, building a case based on the evidence I'd provided as co-trustee. "Mrs. Patterson," Detective Williams continued, "we have documentation showing systematic withdrawal of funds from Tyler Patterson's trust account without proper authorization, along with falsified quarterly reports provided to the beneficiary." "This is ridiculous," Crystal protested, her voice reaching a pitch that probably hurt the dogs in the neighborhood. "I'm being accused of crimes at my own son's wedding because of a vindictive old woman's lies." Tyler stood up slowly, his face a mask of cold fury I'd never seen before. "Your son's wedding? Your son?" His voice was barely controlled. "Crystal, I don't even know who you are anymore." "I'm the woman who raised you," Crystal screamed, all pretense finally abandoned. "I'm the one who took care of you when your precious Jennifer died. I'm the one who made this family work." "You're the one who saw an opportunity and took it," Tyler replied quietly, "and you've been taking ever since." Detective Williams stepped forward. "Ma'am, we also have evidence of credit cards opened in Tyler's name without his knowledge, and a second mortgage taken against property that wasn't legally yours to mortgage." The wedding guests were no longer pretending to eat. Phones were definitely out now, though whether for recording or texting emergency updates to people who'd missed the show, I couldn't tell. Crystal's book club friends had quietly started gathering their purses, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the explosion. "That property should have been mine anyway," Crystal snapped, her control completely gone. "David would have left me everything if he'd had time to update his will properly." "Actually," I said, pulling out yet another document, "David did update his will. 6 months before he died, he left the house to Tyler, with the understanding that you could live there until Tyler married, at which point you were supposed to move out and transfer full ownership to him." Tyler's jaw dropped. "The house is mine?" "Has been for 3 years. Crystal's been collecting rental income from the tenant in the apartment above the garage, money that legally belongs to you." That's when Crystal made her most desperate play yet. She turned to the assembled wedding guests, with tears streaming down her face. "Please," she said, her voice breaking with calculated emotion. "You have to understand. I loved David so much. I've dedicated my entire adult life to his family. Tyler is like my own son. Everything I did was to protect him from people who would use him for his money." She pointed dramatically at Sophia. "People exactly like her family, who saw a trust fund and a wealthy family name and decided to cash in." That's when Sophia surprised everyone by standing up and walking calmly to Crystal's side. Sophia looked Crystal directly in the eyes and spoke with quiet dignity that commanded the attention of every person in the pavilion. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I want you to know something. Tyler and I don't need his trust fund. We both have good jobs, we're debt-free, and we've saved enough to buy our own home." She paused, letting her words sink into the crowd of wedding guests who'd been listening to Crystal's accusations all evening. "But what you've done tonight isn't about money. It's about respect, honesty, and love, things you clearly know nothing about." Sophia's voice grew stronger. "You've spent this entire wedding reception spreading lies about my family, claiming my father was a criminal and my mother was an addict. You've stolen money from Tyler for years while lecturing him about financial responsibility, and you've built your entire relationship with him on deception." Crystal opened her mouth to protest, but Sophia held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You want to talk about people who marry for money? You're the one who moved in on a grieving widower and convinced him you were what his traumatized child needed. You're the one who's been living off money that wasn't yours for 3 years. You're the one who saw Tyler's wedding as a threat to your financial security and decided to destroy it rather than lose control." The applause started slowly, then built into a genuine ovation. Even some of Crystal's book club friends were clapping, though they looked thoroughly embarrassed by association. Tyler moved to stand beside his wife, taking her hand. "Crystal," he said quietly, "I want you to understand something. Sophia just defended her family and mine with more grace and dignity than you've shown in 23 years. That's what real class looks like." Crystal's face crumpled. "Tyler, please. I'm your mother. I raised you. Doesn't that count for anything?" Tyler looked at her for a long moment, and I could see the little boy who'd once loved her wrestling with the man who now understood what she really was. "Jennifer Walsh was my mother," he said finally. "You were just the woman who convinced my grieving father that he needed help raising me. The woman who saw an opportunity and took it." Detective Williams stepped forward with handcuffs. "Mrs. Patterson, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft." As he read Crystal her rights, she made one final desperate attempt to maintain control. "You'll regret this, Tyler," she shouted as the handcuffs clicked into place. "Without me, you're nothing. I made this family. I made you who you are." Tyler watched calmly as Detective Williams led her toward the pavilion exit. "No, Crystal," he said quietly. "You made me what you needed me to be. There's a difference." As the police car's taillights disappeared into the night, the wedding reception slowly began to piece itself back together. The band, who'd been standing frozen with their instruments for the past hour, tentatively started playing again. Conversations resumed in hushed tones, with many guests approaching Tyler and Sophia to offer support and apologies for Crystal's behavior. I found myself standing with the happy couple and Sophia's parents, all of us still processing what had just happened. Robert Chen shook his head in amazement. "In 30 years of accounting, I've seen family financial abuse, but never quite like this," he said. "To steal from your own stepson while accusing his wife's family of being gold diggers. That takes a special kind of twisted logic." Linda Chen put her arm around Sophia. I'm so proud of how you handled that, sweetheart. You showed more maturity in 10 minutes than that woman showed in 23 years. Tyler was quiet, still holding the trust documents in his hands. Grandma, he said finally, how long have you known about the missing money? I started suspecting something 6 months ago when I requested copies of the quarterly reports, I admitted. The numbers didn't add up with what Crystal was telling you about the trust's performance, but I wanted to be absolutely certain before I accused her of anything. So you hired a forensic accountant. Patricia Winters, the best in the state. She's been building this case methodically for weeks. I looked at my grandson, still sangria-stained dress and all. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, on your wedding day. Tyler hugged me tightly. Don't apologize. You saved us from years of lies and manipulation, and you gave me back my real mother's memory. Sophia squeezed my other hand. Thank you for defending my family, and for teaching me what real strength looks like. As the evening wound down, many guests approached me to express their admiration for how I'd handled the situation. Several mentioned that they'd suspected something was off about Crystal's stories, but hadn't known how to address it. The way she was talking about Sophia's family just didn't ring true, one elderly woman confided. I've known the Chens for years through the school district. Lovely people. But Crystal was so convincing with her concerns. It was a sobering reminder of how easily lies can spread when they're delivered with enough authority and false concern. Tyler and Sophia decided to continue with their honeymoon plans, though they spent an hour on the phone with their bank and lawyer, securing the trust fund and beginning the process of recovering the stolen money. Patricia Winters assured them that between the documentation and Crystal's recorded confession, recovery would be straightforward. As I finally headed home, still wearing my sangria-stained dress, I reflected on the evening's events. It hadn't been the wedding I'd hoped for my grandson, but it had ended with truth, which was perhaps the greatest gift I could have given them. 6 months later, Tyler and Sophia bought a beautiful little house 4 blocks from my own. They used money from their savings and a modest loan, keeping the recovered trust fund invested for their future children's education. Crystal had pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud, receiving probation and an order to pay full restitution. I was working in my garden on a Saturday morning when Tyler stopped by with coffee and news. The last of the money came through yesterday, he said, settling into my patio chair. Patricia says Crystal actually stole $197,000 over 3 years, not the $180,000 we originally thought. What's the extra money from? Rental income from the apartment above our garage. Apparently, she'd been collecting $200 a month for 2 years and never mentioned it to me. Tyler shook his head. I still can't believe how systematically she planned all of this. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning sun warm my rose garden. Tyler seemed more peaceful these days, though I knew the betrayal still stung. Have you heard from her? I asked gently. She sends a card on holidays. Brief notes, mostly apologies and promises that she's getting counseling. Tyler sipped his coffee. I'm not ready to forgive her yet. Maybe I never will be. But I'm trying not to let her poison the good memories from when I was younger. That's very mature of you. Sophia's been helping me work through it. She keeps reminding me that Crystal did provide stability when I needed it, even if her motives were selfish. It's complicated. I nodded, understanding the complexity of his feelings. Even knowing what we knew now, Crystal had been the only mother figure Tyler remembered for most of his life. I've been thinking about Jennifer, Tyler continued. My real mom. I found some of her things in Dad's study that Crystal had boxed up and hidden. Photo albums, letters she wrote me before she died, even a baby book she kept. His voice grew stronger. She seemed like an amazing person, kind, funny, completely devoted to Dad and me. Reading her letters. I understand now why Dad was so devastated when she died, and why it was so easy for Crystal to step in and take advantage of that grief. Your mother would be so proud of the man you've become, I said, meaning every word. And she would adore Sophia. Tyler smiled. I think so too. Sophia's been amazing through all of this. She never once made it about her, even when Crystal was spreading those awful lies about her family. As if summoned by our conversation, Sophia appeared around the corner of my house, carrying a basket of what looked like fresh-baked goods. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, she said, setting the basket on my patio table. I was experimenting with your apple cinnamon muffin recipe and thought you might like to be my taste tester. This had become our Saturday morning routine. Sophia would bake, Tyler would bring coffee, and we'd spend an hour or two in my garden, talking about everything and nothing. It was the kind of easy family relationship I dreamed of having. A year after the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call that brought the whole Crystal situation full circle. It was Detective Williams, now retired from the police force. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I wanted to let you know that Crystal Patterson has requested a meeting with you and Tyler. She's completed her court-ordered counseling and wants to make what she calls a proper amend." I was quiet for a moment, processing this development. What exactly does that mean? She's not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. According to her counselor, she wants to take full responsibility for her actions and provide some information that might help Tyler understand his father better. Information about David? Apparently she found some letters and documents that belonged to your son. Things about his first marriage and Tyler's early childhood that she'd hidden away. She wants to return them. I called Tyler immediately, and we agreed to meet with Crystal together in Detective Williams' presence at a neutral location. A week later, we found ourselves sitting in a conference room at the community center, facing a woman who looked dramatically different from the polished, controlling Crystal we remembered. She was thinner, quieter, and her expensive clothing had been replaced with simple, modest attire. When she spoke, it was without the manipulative charm that had once defined her. "Tyler," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to start by saying that nothing I did was your fault. You were a child who needed care and love, and I used that need to justify my own selfish desires." She placed a wooden box on the table between us. "These belong to you. Letters your father wrote to Jennifer before they married, photos of your early childhood, and Jennifer's jewelry that was supposed to be saved for your future wife." Tyler opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of letters tied with ribbon, a photo album, and a small velvet jewelry box containing what looked like an engagement ring and wedding band. "Your father never stopped loving Jennifer," Crystal continued, tears streaming down her face. "Even after we married, he kept these things hidden in his study. I found them after he died, and I was jealous. Jealous of a dead woman's memory, so I hid them away." She took a shaky breath. "I told myself I was protecting you from painful memories, but really, I was protecting myself from the truth that David settled for me because he was broken by grief, not because he loved me the way he loved her." Tyler looked up from the letters. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because in counseling, I learned that love doesn't require possession or control. If I had really loved you, I would have honored your father's memory and your mother's legacy instead of trying to erase them." Crystal's voice grew stronger. "I would have celebrated your marriage to Sophia instead of trying to destroy it because I was afraid of losing my financial security." She stood up slowly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Tyler. I'm just trying to undo as much damage as I can. You deserve to know the truth about your parents' love story, and Sophia deserved to have her wedding day be about joy, not my lies and manipulations." After Crystal left, Tyler and I sat in the community center parking lot, reading through David's letters to Jennifer. They were beautiful, heartfelt expressions of love from a young man who'd found his soulmate. "She was right about one thing," Tyler said finally. "Dad never got over losing Mom. These letters, they show a man who was completely devoted to Jennifer. I can see why it was so easy for Crystal to step into that void." He closed the letter he'd been reading. "I'm glad she finally told the truth, even if it took a year and court-ordered therapy to get there." "What will you do now?" I asked. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to take these letters home and share them with Sophia. I want her to know about the kind of love my parents had, because that's the kind of love I want us to have, too." He looked at me with eyes that reminded me so much of David at that age. "And I'm going to make sure our children know the truth about their grandmother Jennifer, not the lies Crystal told, but the reality of who she was." As we drove home, I reflected on the strange journey we'd all taken. Crystal's wedding day destruction had ultimately led to truth, healing, and a stronger family bond than we'd ever had before. Sometimes the most painful revelations are also the most necessary ones. Tyler and Sophia now live in their little house with baby Jennifer, named after the grandmother she'll never meet but whose story she'll always know. They visit me every Sunday for dinner, and we've never once mentioned Crystal's name at those gatherings. Some stories end with forgiveness, others end with truth, and sometimes that's enough. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.